It's a collaboration between ICCR and Open Mic. We spent 6 months or more, interviewed dozens of experts in the field of technology and labor, and it's a long piece, and it covers a lot of different issues. And the focus, as Nadira said, is the impact of digital technologies on low-wage workers. And one of the things that surprised me when we started out was, the question was, what's a low-wage worker? And there's really no consensus about that, but the US government says a low-wage worker is a person whose hourly wage rates are so low that even if they worked full-time all year, their annual earnings would fall below the poverty line for a family of 4. So depending on location, the federal poverty line in the United States right now is about $30,000 to $35,000. And Oxfam takes some of that data in a recent report. They estimated that more than 39 million workers in the United States, 1 out of 4 workers in the United States are low-wage workers. That's pretty astonishing. And so the impact of these technologies, the technologies are at work on very, very vulnerable communities. In fact, as Oxfam notes, most of them are likely to be workers of color, women of color, single parents, and workers in traditionally low-wage retail, restaurant, hospitality, and the gig sectors. What the report does, we look at a whole range of issues, including data workers, as we've just been discussing. One big concern that people often bring up is, for example, AI and automation, and is AI going to put people out of jobs? And there's disagreement about how big an issue that is, but it's not an insignificant worry. McKinsey did a big report and found that as AI expands further into the workplace, workers in low-wage jobs are up to 14 times more likely to need to change occupations than those in the highest wage positions. And most likely they're going to need additional skills to do that. So reskilling workers is going to be a big issue, a big challenge for companies. But beyond that, the report goes into, we talk about shareholder engagement, and there's demonstrable evidence that companies that pay attention to human capital, that take care of their workers, do better both in terms of profits and stock performance. There's very clear research on that. We look at artificial intelligence and job displacement and what's going to happen there. We look at algorithmic management systems, something Michelle talked about earlier, about how algorithms are used to both maximize the amount of revenue a company can get from consumers while reducing and putting it basically into a constant second-by-second negotiation with the workers as to what they're going to get paid, depending on what the circumstances are in the workforce at a particular moment. We look at the gig economy and low-wage workers, Uber, Lyft. And one of the things that's happening increasingly is that the technology is being used to sever the traditional employer-employee relationship. In other words, everyone is now increasingly a contractor and working for bit rates as opposed to an employment contract. There was just a big court case in California, which unfortunately solidified a lot of that law. Then we look at also the exploitation of data workers, as Krista and Fasika just spoke about, and I can't add anything to that discussion. We look at automated hiring tools, using biometric data, using your facial expressions. Again, as Michelle talked about, how many times do you blink? How well do you play a video game? And using that as a basis for hiring, ignoring the fact that, for example, people with disabilities may have a lot of trouble with many of these kinds of technologies, but hiring people based on automated hiring tools. We look at the direct care workforce, people who do home care, oftentimes with the elderly, and how increasingly some of these technologies and those people are people who are already underpaid, overworked, and exploited, but how some of these technologies are turning them again into bit workers. So it's kind of a depressing outlook, but we also then talk about opportunities for shareholder engagement. And there's kind of 3 things that we suggest. Most of you in this room will be familiar with them, that investors actively engage their portfolio companies to conduct human rights due diligence before the development and deployment of some of these technologies. Secondly, an issue that came up, I think, yesterday on one of the panels, that that these discussions include a worker voice in investor analyses. Don't just look at it from the investment and the investor and corporate viewpoint, but include the investor, the worker voice in all of this. And then something that probably hasn't been done, in my opinion, enough among investors is to participate actively in efforts to shape legislation and regulation that fosters responsible human rights-based policies. In conclusion, one of the things as we talk to a lot of the experts, and this is kind of the upside, we heard time and time again, and I don't know if Michelle would agree, these are early days on these issues. It's a depressing outlook in many ways, but a lot of the regulation has yet to be shaped, and there's enormous opportunity there. The companies, in many ways, are grappling with many of these issues, and there are some who would be open, I think, to some of these discussions. So these are early days, and there are opportunities for investors, and everyone in this room, hopefully, will pick up on that. So the report provides a whole lot of detail on what investors can do, strategies, tactics, questions, and it's really kind of an introduction to this larger field.